Hey guys, this is John. I'm playing Greateldone in a 15 plus 2 game on leechess.org. I think that's how you say the player's name. Could be Greateldone for all I know. Let's play a Sicilian. They're rated 2017 and they seem to know me. Just wish them good luck. 38 players watching already. Pressure. Okay, so what type of Sicilian do I want to play? The con is my wheelhouse. That's where I feel most comfortable right now. So I am going to play e6 on move 2. I occasionally play other lines like the classical Sicilian and a bad Najdorf on occasion. The Najdorf is a line in particular I would like to improve, but it's such a nightmare as far as theory goes that I don't know if I'll be undertaking that anytime soon. So b4, sort of a delayed wing gambit. I got to take this pawn. I'm not even going to think about it. b6 might have been a reasonable move too, but that would not be nearly as interesting. And the critical test of a gambit is to take the pawn, at least one of the pawns that are offered. So d4, occupying the center. I think knight f6, attacking the pawn, has to be a top candidate. d5 as well. Although after d5, probably white will play e5, and maybe we'll get some sort of French-like position. I slightly prefer knight f6. That was my first instinct right here. Goading that pawn forward, but securing the d5 square if white does advance looks good to me. So I'm going to go with that move. But I think d5 was also fine. You do get the sense when you run into a gambit line like this, like it's your opponent's pet weapon, and they've probably played it before. So I'll be curious when we look at this game afterwards how often b4 has been played in the database. I might have actually faced this move before in an over-the-board game. There's a game I played at the US Open several years ago where my opponent played a very early b4, although it was in a slightly different position. Yeah, my opponent played c3 first, I think. Okay, so bishop d3, defending the pawn. So again, I could play d5. Maybe even with the idea of jumping into e4 this time. My knight is a target on e4, though. White might be able to surround it with queen e2. Attack it multiple times. And I don't have a good retreat square. So what else could I do? I could just play knight c6. But d5 is starting to feel like the way forward. Maybe I could play d5, e5, knight e4. And just content myself with the fact that if white ever does want to win the pawn back, at least they'd have to give me their light square bishop. Which is probably good compensation for having given the pawn back. If I were to play knight c6, let's say white castles, bishop e7. I was thinking if e5, knight d5, and then if I castle, bishop takes h7 is ever a big deal. But I do control the g5 square pretty well, so maybe that's not a problem. Okay, let's play knight c6. I'm not concerned about d5. I can just take twice if white does that. So probably castles will be played, and then I think bishop e7 is what I will do. Oftentimes when white is gambited a pawn with b4, they'll follow up with a3, and then after take, try to develop some piece, and maybe even focus in on this weak d6 square. If, for instance, the bishops get traded on a3, then white could try to sink a knight into the d6 square. I don't think I would let that happen, but it is an idea. And a3 is played. So, do I play my intended move bishop e7 or something else like d5? Well, we know the story with d5. d5, e5, knight e4 looks similar. If bishop e7, I have a feeling white will not take, because then after knight takes, then I'll be on the bishop straight away. I like that fact. Not a big fan of taking. Maybe queen b6 is possible, hitting the pawn on d4. Lots of options. I mean, admittedly, taking is not terrible. I would just like to see if white will do the job for me so I can get my knight in here and hit that bishop on d3. Let's say bishop e7, e5, knight d5, take. Maybe knight d takes on b4, bishop e4. My knight is kind of hanging out on b4. It's not too stable. Thinking again about d5 followed by knight e4. This is still on my radar. Queen e2, possibly knight c3. Let's play bishop e7 first. I don't know that this line is that good for white. e5, knight d5, a takes b4, knight d takes b4. Because they would have to move the bishop again, so bishop e4, something like that, d5. Okay, they're going to take. So I think I'm happy to trade on d3 if allowed. White can't move the bishop away because then they would lose the pawn. So my opponent took immediately on b4. He seemed to be content with that exchange. Okay, now do we capture on d3? Probably. So knight takes d3, queen takes d3, d5. Then if e5, I can play knight e4, knight d7. Both moves look good. Yeah, both should be fine. I do like taking now before white gets a chance to play e5 and then possibly move the bishop to e4. So let's do that. And now I will go d5 to stop white from playing e5, knight d5, c4. So at least make them make a decision with this pawn. After e5, I'm leaning towards knight d7 as opposed to knight e4. I know knight e4 looks more active, but I'd like to lock down c4 if I could. And I wonder if knight b6 to c4 is a maneuver I'd be able to execute better than if my knight were to be sent to e4. I mean, on e4 it looks active, but what is it really doing there? White actually just plays this move. That surprises me. I thought for sure they would play e5. So he's offering an exchange of a pair of minor pieces plus a pawn. But then again, I don't feel I have to make that exchange yet. I could take once. Take, and then castle. That could be a pretty good plan. And then maybe look to play b6 followed by bishop b7. This is something I'm considering. Nah, let's castle first. This knight looks clumsy on d2. I don't quite believe it on that square. And I still think there's a good chance white will want to play e5. And psychologically, it's hard for them to make the decision to play e5 now that they passed it up on the previous move. That would make knight d2 look a little pointless. Oh, the spectator count dropped by a lot. Okay, less pressure now. I wonder if I was on the Lee Chess top game for a moment. By the time you'll be watching this video, I will be in Tucson, Arizona, teaching at a chess camp. This is a camp that I teach at every year. It's called the Western Invitational Chess Camp. And it's really nice. I like working there. It's kind of like a working vacation because the instructors are treated very well. You get a lot of energy from the kids. I love working with very motivated junior players. And like 95% of the camp is kids. Actually, more than that. Occasionally, there's a couple adults that come. But the kids are a lot of fun. And all very strong, too. You have to be minimum, I think, 1,500 to get into the camp. And some of the campers are upwards of 2,300, 2,400. So when I'm teaching someone like that, I actually get better as a result because I can't just give autopilot answers, let's say, to certain things certain questions they pose me. The higher rated players are really challenging me, and in many cases, I'm having to think just as hard as they are, especially if we're solving positions, playing out games, that sort of thing. I'll try to post some videos while I'm there, by the way. There are other instructors, including a few GM instructors like Alexander Ipatov, Robert Hess, Julio Sidora. Danny Wrench is not there this year, unfortunately, nor is Alejandro Ramirez. Both those guys usually teach the camp too, but they're absent this year. So I'm thinking knight d7 against this one. Just pondering whether knight e8 is worth it, but that's not even a move I really looked at. Knight d7 seems more consistent, especially with what I said in terms of the c4 square. Yeah. I shouldn't spend too much time thinking about that. The only reason to go to e8, I think, would be if I were to go to c7, and somehow c7 would be really good. I mean, maybe knight e8, c7, bishop d7, bishop b5 was a plan. But I kind of have my sights set on fianchettoing this bishop. It would be nice to play a6, b5, knight b6, bishop b7, maybe rook c8 and go attack the pawn on c2, plant the c4 square. One thing that I suspect will play out here, and you're already noticing it, it's hard for white to attack without a light square bishop. Like, they can't organize good pressure against h7. If they had a light square bishop, let's say even on e2, they could do some plan like c3, bishop d1, bishop c2, and harass me on this pawn. Try to force me to make a weakness like g6 or play f5 or something. But without the light square bishop, I think my king is going to be a lot safer than it normally would be. So I'm happy with the result of the opening. Bishop a3, so white offers to trade the bishops. Probably a good decision. I do think that's smart. So a6, let's say bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, at least to get my queen off the back rank if white does capture. And then I'm on my way to playing b5 and clamping the position further. Maybe white could play rook f to b1, though. So if b5, rook takes b5 is possible. I've got that hanging rook, don't I? After all is said and done. So the other way I could play this would be just knight b6. And then bishop d7. A faster way of getting the bishop into the game. It also blocks the b file, because I do think there's a good chance white will post a rook on b1. Yeah, maybe I should go with that plan. There's also b6 and just playing bishop b7. But I'm liking c4. Or knight b6, looking at the c4 square, I should say. Let's do that. Assuming white takes on e7 and I take with the queen, I do have to watch the g5 square. Make sure white can't pounce with the knight at some stage, but my queen is guarding it for the moment. They could think about playing h4 to try to support knight g5, but then I think I would just play h6 and shut down that idea with one move. Yeah, I think the timing is good on this move, because if bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, rook f b1, I can play bishop d7, and rook takes b6 is not working for white, because after a takes b6, my rook on f8 will be supporting the rook on a8. These two pieces will have cleared the 8th rank, so the rooks would be defending each other. I also wanted to say thank you to those of you who watch my standard games regularly. I know when I cut down my video schedule and started posting a little bit less, the people who were most vocal about that change, and they were requesting that I keep these standard videos, are you guys, the ones who are watching this type of video regularly and investing the 45 minutes or sometimes an hour or more that it takes to watch one of these videos. So I think you guys are some of my most dedicated channel watchers, video watchers, and I'm very grateful for that. So I'll keep playing these games and recording them as long as you guys will keep watching. Okay, so we get this trade, and then white advances c4, getting rid of the backward pawn. So taking is obvious. Pawn takes, knight takes. But what to do from there? Knight takes, queen takes, bishop d7, but they have queen c7 at the very end. That is a little awkward, isn't it? Maybe I trade everything and then play b6. That could be the way to handle this position, getting the bishop to b7 on the next move. It weakens this diagonal, but I don't see a good way white can play to take advantage of that. And also, if I get the bishop on b7, I'll be controlling e4, so white can't even bring their remaining knight to e4. I think that looks really, really nice. I think either capture on c4 is fine here. Let's take with the knight. This is probably the one that's going to most convince white to take, even though I'm sure white would take anyways. Yeah, so now b6. I like the look of this a lot, as opposed to bishop d7, queen c7, which would give me some coordination problems because of the weakness on b7. Unless white comes up with something quick here, they are probably just losing this position. I know that might seem like an exaggeration given I'm only up one pawn, but this is dire for white because these pawns are connected and passed. d4 is incredibly weak in the long run, and I'm about to obtain a good bishop on this diagonal, much better than white's knight on f3. So white needs something like right now, and if they don't have that, I think the advantage is going to be pronounced in black's favor. It's hard to attack this chain, too. If he plays something like, I don't know, let's say rook a2, or maybe rook a4, bishop b7, rook a1, I can always sink my bishop in on d5. It's nice and protected there. So white plays knight d2, and I want to prevent that transfer of the knight to e4 and get my bishop on this great diagonal, so I'll do that. Maybe white should shift focus here a little bit and play f4. That's probably not a bad idea under the circumstances. f4, f5. The way I would look at this as white is the position is almost lost anyways, and the only way you're going to get back in the action is by doing something drastic. Doesn't matter if you lose in a brutal, violent way or a nice, tidy, ground down way. You know, a loss is a loss. And I think oftentimes people play too passive in bad positions when lashing out in a smart way, maybe like a calculated way, let's say, is your best chance for getting back in the game. Because strategically, white's position is busted. I mean, all the long-term factors are in black's favor. So let's see if Greateldone will play f4. And I'm also thinking about what I'll do against f4. Bishop d5 seems like a natural way to start. That allows my queen to help defend this pawn. And then maybe I can free up this rook. Okay, so he plays rook b1. Yeah, I think this is the wrong approach. One reason is that I think I can play queen g5, hitting the knight and also threatening mate on g2. And that might just win on the spot. It's a double attack, and how does he defend? Because knight f3, there's bishop takes f3, and the g-pawn is pinned. But also just the philosophy behind this move, I think, is flawed. Like, he can only stop me on the queen side for so long. He's not going to get anywhere playing defense against these pawns. So I think he needed to throw that f-pawn at me. So just making sure that queen to g5 wins. I think it does. Yeah, I don't see any defense. There's no way his queen can defend both those points. So let's go ahead and play it. Yeah, no way to escape material loss. So this gambit is probably dubious, but in my opinion, white's troubles started with knight bd2 on move 10. Didn't think that was a good move. Especially since white played e5 on the next move anyways. I think they should play e5 straight away and maintain the flexibility of their knight. It could maybe be said that a takes b4 on move 7 was a mistake as well. That seemed cooperative, allowing me to take with my knight, if you recall, hitting that bishop on d3. So we'll confirm with the database and the engine, but that's my read on the opening. One other thing too, as long as I have some time to talk in this video, if you are a player who watches these standard games but does not play standard yourself and you want to get better, I would highly recommend playing standard games. Even at the expense of watching my videos. I'd much rather have you play than watch me play standard games. But I mention this because I get the sense that a lot of people just stick to bullet and blitz and nothing else, and they're still trying to get better though. And trust me, the time control that's going to bring you the most improvement is standard. I think title players are partly to blame for this problem because the vast majority of YouTubers, myself included, play mainly bullet and blitz. So you might get the impression that, well, if serious players don't play standard that regularly, why should I? Why should I, the 1200 rated player, let's say, play standard? But really, you should have even more of an incentive to play standard if you're lower rated because you haven't built up that base of experience yet you need to be successful in shorter time controls. All the shorter time controls are going to do for you, especially if you're a fairly low rated player, let's say 1200 or below, is make you more confused and frustrated for the most part. I mean, playing like 3-minute blitz, no increment, you're not going to get much out of that. Occasionally you're going to win a nice game. You're going to see your rating rise and fall just like any other time control. But most importantly, you're not really going to learn much. And you're going to get very frustrated because it's impossible to avoid streaks in any time control. And the faster the time control, the more streaks you're going to see because you're getting more games in, right? Standard is great as an anti-tilt measure. So tilt is a poker term, if you're not familiar with it. Basically means getting frustrated with the way your results are going and playing more and more, trying to work your way out of it, let's say. And in the process, your thought process becomes increasingly clouded and your judgment becomes impaired. Almost like you're intoxicated. And that's what can happen when you play too many games, especially fast time control games. Okay, so my opponent resigned. And let's just tell him, good game. So, going back to the opening, taking the gambit is definitely the critical test. I think the only other move I might consider is b6, just to support the pawn. But taking and allowing the center, I do not mind because it's not like black is completely ceding the center to white. With knight f6, we're counterattacking, and we do have the ability to play d5. So, after bishop d3, knight c6, a3, bishop e7, take. I thought this is where I maybe started to get some clear edge. Being able to eliminate the light square bishop was key. I mentioned how in the middle game, my king felt a lot more secure in the fact that white can't create a battery against h7. Just feels like white has a hard time proving anything here. And if they have to switch to queenside play, I think it's misguided for them. The whole gambit is misguided. And he mentions there, what a blunder. I was thinking f3 before rook fb1, but it's done. Yeah, you were in dire straits. So as I was mentioning, Greateldone, I think you had to try your chances with f4 right here. Let's just tell him that before we click over to the analysis board. So let's move 18. Because as I was describing, I mean, if white has to switch over to defense on the queen side, that's not going to cut it. They're just going to lose. And it probably won't take very long either. You just can't stop these pawns. And also my play down the c file is going to give white trouble too, and the bishop. So I really think white has to switch gears here and try to get f4, f5 in. What else before I add the engine? I was debating what to do here. I am glad that I kept the tension for a move and gave white another chance to play e5. Because I think if I would have traded straight away, like take, knight takes, queen takes, that opens up the board a little bit. You might think that black should trade given that I'm up a pawn, but I think keeping the tension and keeping that pawn firmly planted on d5 is a better strategy. And proceeding by that logic, maybe white shouldn't play e5 at all. Maybe they should play something like, I don't know, c3 or bishop a3 right here. If I've demonstrated that I'm not in a huge hurry to take on e4, then it makes sense to delay that decision, any decision with the pawn for white. Okay, so let's go to the analysis board. So my opponent had 1 inaccuracy, 1 blunder, 0 mistakes for a 36 average centipawn loss. And I had triple zeros. 0 inaccuracies, 0 mistakes, 0 blunders for a 6 average centipawn loss. So this is the wing Gambit Deferred, according to the Lichess Openings Explorer. And let's just add the book right away, just to make sure we're on firm theoretical territory. So yes, c takes b4. As you can see, black also plays b6 from time to time, just trying to replace the pawn. So c takes b4, d4 is the main move. And here black usually plays d5 or knight f6. Yeah, with good results in both cases. I think these results are showing two different things. One, good players probably don't play this line too often for black. And two, the line, or for white rather. And two, the line is just not that good for white. You can see that black is scoring well over 50%. So that's an indication that this line probably isn't that great for white over a largish sample. So knight f6 hit the pawn. Bishop d3. Now I brought this knight out to c6, a3, and bishop e7. Okay, so one line I was curious about here, and looks like we're officially out of book after that move. So I was wondering if white could go after a takes b4 as played, knight takes b4, e5 right here. Because I was thinking if I play my knight over, then these knights don't seem stable somehow. Like bishop e2 or bishop e4, I don't know. And c3 could always be played. So if we back up for a moment, maybe e5 is the way to go. Yeah, and I could take on d3 right away. Queen takes d3, knight d5. This is probably the better way of doing it, because I still get the light square bishop here. But I like this center and the possibility of c4 much more than what white got in the game, where black's pawn ends up on d5. You can still see that black has a half pawn advantage, but yeah, this looks like a better shot. So after castles, I leaped at the chance to eliminate that bishop and then play d5. No reason to play a cramped position. And here I castled. So let me show that position if there were some exchanges that took place on e4. This didn't feel like as big of an advantage if this happens, especially if white gets a chance to play c4 and stop queen d5. But even the engine likes bishop a3, and even here, white's going to have more play than they did in the game. This is the same material distribution as in the game. I have a light square bishop against white's knight, and I'm up a pawn. But the evaluation is a lot lower than what you will probably see coming up in the game. And that's entirely due to the pawn structure. White doesn't have pawns that are fixed on e5 and d4, not going anywhere. The fact that this pawn's on c2, ready to go to c4, helps white out quite a bit. Also, the queen is observing the b7 pawn, so I can't easily develop the bishop here. So, yeah, that's why I didn't want to take on e4. I castled. Okay, and the computer does think e5 is okay. I was pegging that as a possible mistake for white, because it does seem inconsistent with the whole knight bd2 operation. And speaking of that, I guess back here we should look at what happens if white plays e5 right away. So I was debating whether to play knight e4 or knight d7. I suspect I would have played knight d7. But yeah, even this probably promises white more than the game continuation. There's just more resources on the board to fight. Although I think c4 will still be a problem. I might still try to embark on this plan. Get the bishop to d7. So here I played knight d7, and lo and behold, the computer likes knight e8 a little bit more. Actually, they're about equal. Both 7/10 of a pawn advantage to black. Yeah, like I said, I don't think there's a real good reason to play knight e8 unless I'm specifically going to play knight c7, bishop d7, bishop b5. Admittedly, that might be a good plan, but knight d7 was what I was thinking about all along, so I played it. Bishop a3. c4 is another suggestion. So c4 before the knight lands on b6. And then I'm best off playing b6, but that would allow an isolated pawn. I would have to worry about d5. I wonder what I would have done if c4 was played. I don't think I want to play knight b6 here, because then white gets to play c5 and grab some space. I bet I would have taken. Knight takes and maybe then played b6, or knight b6. The engine wants to play a5, stake out space. But maybe if b6, queen e4 is an issue, hitting the rook, and my bishop can't reach b7. That's a funny line. Bishop a6, rook takes a6, queen c8, forking these two pieces. No advantage for black, though. At best, I can just get my material back. So c4 would have presented more problems. Instead, white played bishop a3. I went knight b6. The other line I was thinking about was, I think, a6, right? Yes, I mentioned the possibility of a6, bishop takes e7, queen takes e7. And I was saying that white might think about a move like rook fb1 here, with the idea of preventing me from playing b5 due to rook takes b5, and this rook is undefended. I have to keep that in mind with white's rook sitting on a1 still, in the half-open a file. But knight b6 is nice and tidy, kind of a efficient developing move. Or, if not developing move, efficient reorganizational move, preparing the development of the bishop to d7. Not even messing with these pawns yet, and focusing in on the c4 square. So if white were to do something like this, I would just play bishop d7, hopefully with a rook or something coming to c8 in the future. I did think about this, actually, bishop c5 hitting the knight, and I thought maybe take knight a4 would be good, attacking the c5 pawn, indirectly preventing this from happening due to the fork. So bishop takes e7, queen takes e7, c4. And that seems to be a mistake as well, c4. The position's already pretty uncomfortable, but I think because of the game continuation, c4 might just accelerate white's downfall. So better is rook a5, just going by the engine line here. Rook b1. Yeah, rook fc8. This rook stays guarding the a7 pawn. And I might have some practical problems getting a knight into c4, because b7 is hanging. h4, White could always think about playing that just to try to launch the knight to g5 and attack h7. But black is in firm control, all the same. So c4, we got this trade. Yep, and b6 just seems like a killing move, really. It's a pretty modest move, but this solves the only remaining question in black's position, which is how are you going to get the light square bishop out? If I were to play this right away, white has some reason to hope after queen c7, because they're attacking the b7 pawn and the bishop is pinned. I do not want this. But b6, I'm just a move away from complete coordination and domination of the position with an extra pawn. So white goes knight d2, and then bishop b7. Yeah, and here the computer likes f3. So you can see that the evaluation is already almost out of reach. Like if this were engine versus engine, black wins every time. But human versus human, white is always going to have some chance. So I know the engine likes f3, but I don't know. I probably would have played this, even if it does lead to an even greater deficit, according to the computer. But I think you just got to create some sort of issue. Even if it's just a mini crisis in your opponent's head, like give them some sort of problem to solve. That would be my philosophy as white. Doesn't matter how you lose. It's still a 0 at the end of the day, so might as well try to create some issues for them. But yes, rook fb1 brought an abrupt conclusion to the game due to the double attack on d2 and g2. And once again, knight f3 is going to fail due to bishop takes f3, and this pawn is pinned. All right, so summing up this game, a dubious opening by white. But white's loss in this game was not due to the opening necessarily. Although I think that does complicate things for my opponent, because when you play a somewhat dubious line like this, where you've sacrificed material, the margin for error is slim thereafter. So I think a couple suboptimal moves, I mean, probably this decision, even still, I still don't like this for white. A takes b4. You can see that the engine likes that e5 move a little bit more. I think white has to try to bring about a structure where my pawn does not reach d5. So for that reason, it's entirely possible that the immediate d5 is stronger. But there were a couple opportunities for white to try to push their pawn to e5 before my pawn reaches d5. And I think that probably gave them the best chance. Once I'm able to eliminate the light square bishop, castle, and get a solid pawn structure, this is one-way traffic in black's favor. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll be back again soon with another one. Talk to you guys later. Bye.